More refreshments. Anyone that would like to get some ice cream, help yourselves, and also the council or those of us up here will probably be eating some since it is melting as we speak. We had an open house before the meeting started here, and so just a little administrative note there. Again, welcome. Appreciate those that have come. We have the main focus of tonight's meeting is our city budget and to propose the tentative budget for adoption, and we'll discuss that more. But first, we'll start off with an invocation and pledge of allegiance, and we've asked Councilwoman Cheryl Stoker to offer the invocation and lead us in the pledge of allegiance this evening.
Father in heaven, we're thankful that we could be here this night and discuss the budget, and that our residents will know what we were discussing and can see how and why we're coming to these conclusions and the why we're doing the things that we do. We're grateful that we are able to be able to give the information to the residents that they will hopefully understand and know why we have to do this in order for our city to run the way it does. Grateful for the workers that we have and the staff and our police that keep us safe and keep this community as we like it and safe. We ask now that we will be able to discuss these things in a pleasing manner, and that all will go well, and say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 Stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilwoman Stoker. The first thing we have up is a presentation about our budget, but I thought it would be nice if our finance director, I didn't ask him about this, but could just give a little overview quickly about some of the key dates on our budget, what's happened to this point. If you just give us a little background about the meetings that have been held, and then what meetings will be coming in the future. What does the tentative budget mean versus the final budget? So Evan Nelson is our city finance director. And Evan, can you just give us a little overview about the budget process in general, and then the process we've been going through?
Okay, thank you. So the city adopts a new budget for each fiscal year. The fiscal year starts July 1st of each year. And we've gone through quite a process so far of seeking out council priorities and meetings with departments to understand the needs of city departments. We've held a couple of all-day budget retreats to discuss these things in detail, and we've tried to develop a document that reflects the priorities that have been communicated. Tonight we present the tentative budget. According to state law, we have to present and approve a tentative budget at the at the first meeting in May. The final budget has to be approved by June 22nd of each year. So we'll review the tentative budget tonight and propose that the council approve it. The budget document is a public document. We will hold a public hearing prior to adoption of the final budget. And between now and the final budget, there's an opportunity for additional changes to be made according to the direction of the council. So that's kind of a summary. I guess I don't remember the exact date. It's in June. Let me see if I can find it in my calendar. I think it's June 13th is what we have scheduled for the final budget adoption. So we'll look forward to the discussion tonight, and we'll do our best to answer questions that you have, and we'll look forward to June 13th. Anything else, Mayor?
No, I think that covers it. Thank you. And also we have some folks watching online, so I'm sorry, that's why I've got this computer out. I'm just posting something for them to see as well and hear a little bit about the discussion. So John, can you pull up our presentation, please? So this here is going to be a presentation that we're going to go over, and this document, two-page document that we've passed out, and there's more copies at the front door if you weren't able to get one, is going to be a lot of where this presentation comes from. And then after the presentation, we'll be having question and answer if there's any questions, or for our folks who are watching online, if they'd like to submit questions through Facebook or through YouTube. Our city attorney and administrator, John Call, is watching those, so we'd love to take those questions as well.
Mayor,
Yes,
is this presentation online so they could follow along if they wanted to?
it is. That's what I'm posting right now as well. So, with that, do we have the pointer, John?
Actually,
Oh, okay. Okay, and if this, okay, I'll just stand up here for now. So, okay, next. So we wanted to first just make a quick mention about, this is going to factor into some of our discussions. So this isn't part of the little handout, but information just about the growth of the city that is useful for budgeting. It's something that the city looks at a lot because a lot of the city's revenues are tied to growth. For example, impact fees revenues that come when every new home is built in the city. So the city has projected out the amount of growth that we expect to see happening in the city. It comes, I think, as a surprise to no one that there is a lot of growth happening in the city. A lot of private landowners are exercising their right to develop. And so we do expect to see a lot of single-family growth this next budget year, as well as some multifamily and commercial, with several multifamily projects, most significantly the Village at Prominence Point at Washington Boulevard and 1700 North. And then also commercial projects, for example, the Ace Hardware, which just started this week, construction. Actually, they have a team on the ground. Stout Construction is doing construction there. And as well, we expect likely the first new buildings here at Washington and 2700 North, west of Walgreens, to start getting built at that commercial area also. So you'll see these numbers, and John, can you go to the next slide and the next one? They factor into impact fee revenues. The City Council has wanted to make sure that new residents coming to our city are paying their fair share into the city's infrastructure. And so impact fees are assessed on all new building projects in the city. And essentially that provides some additional money. For example, let me take the water. It provides money to dig new wells, to lay new water pipes, to service new homes or businesses that are coming into the city. So I'll come over here now so I can just be a little closer to the screen. So these revenues will be part of our discussion as well. Next, please. So this you have on your handout. It just shows, we just wanted to show real quick kind of the overview of where money comes in and out of the general fund. There's a lot of different funds that we're going to talk about. And by funds, we are referring to different kind of like accounts in the city that cover different pieces of the city operations. The general fund is the largest fund in the city. It's where all basic government functions are paid for. Police, roads, parks and recreation, those kind of functions that are citywide, that all citizens pay into, versus like the utility funds are just those who are using the utilities, which is most people, but someone might have a well, for example, so they're not paying into the water fund. But the general fund, every citizen in the city pays into. You can see where most of the money comes from. The biggest piece is sales tax. We're trying really hard to grow our share of sales tax with new businesses in the city, and we've been successful with that. We've had a significant growth in our sales tax over the last few years. The next largest is property tax, and then the utility tax that we pay every month on our cell phone bill or Rocky Mountain Power bill. Those are the big three sources of revenue, and then some other thing, licenses, grants that we get, intergovernmental charges, fines and forfeitures, things that are coming out of our police department largely, traffic citations, those kind of things, round out that budget. But basically 3/4 of our city revenues come from sales tax, property tax, and the utility tax. Next, please. Now, where that gets spent is on this next graph. You can see the largest items are police, streets is another major item, maintenance of our streets, parks and recreation, several categories there of parks and recreation are large. And then transfers out, which is money that we take from the general fund and put to another fund in the city, such as the capital projects fund to do a major project in the city. Then the other things, legislative, finance, administration, are all fairly small piece of the pie. So us up here, we're not that expensive, just for you to know. The legislative is one of the smallest items here. We do a lot of damage for that 3%. The inspections and buildings and planning, kind of on this other side, are 2 and 3%. Once again, kind of those smaller departments, but very important. You'll notice the expenditures of our general fund are about roughly $100,000 less than the revenues, and that's because we have a surplus that's been budgeted in for this year, which we feel is good news. Next slide. Now I'm going to run through just briefly the utility funds in the city. So each utility fund is tracked separately, and the revenues in those funds are segregated. So water money is not spent on sewer, sewer money is not spent on garbage. So each of those funds is kept separate. Every month when we pay our utility bill, some of that money goes to each of these utility funds. The largest expense in the water fund is depreciation and retained earnings, which is basically money that's being saved for future infrastructure needs, repair and replacement, and that's something we're going to be talking about in more detail tonight. But that's the largest single line item by far in the water fund, which we feel is a good thing, because that means the city's saving aside some funds for the future, although we feel it's not currently enough. So other large expenditures are capital projects in our water fund, and there's a list that I put there on the handout. You can see there's some infrastructure items that'll be happening in the water, different kinds of valves and just infrastructure upgrades. Those are capital projects in the water department. Also some water line replacements. Generally every year we try and do a water line replacement of an old line that's having some problems. Those are in the infrastructure or in the capital projects. Other large items are personnel. It's 14%, but we're pretty proud of that. Our city's expenditures on personnel relative to a lot of other cities is low. It's only the third highest item in our water fund. Others, professional expenses with our engineering, repairs and maintenance, administrative service fees. All of our utilities pay a fee essentially to the city administration to cover costs. For example, that some of my time, our city attorney's time, that is paid out of the general fund, but it's supporting the utility funds. So there is a fee that comes back to the administration from the utility funds. Let's go next, please. Our next highest utility is the sewer fund, and you can see right off the top, almost a full half of the sewer fund is just simply the Central Weber sewer fees. So the money's collected from our citizens and then passed right to the sewer district, which includes most of the cities in Weber County, including North Ogden City. Other large items here are, again, that depreciation expense that I mentioned. We're saving money for future expenditures. Capital projects here in the sewer department. Every year we do some sewer lining projects to keep our pipes getting replaced and upgraded. And then personnel is 11%, again, fairly small compared to the overall size of the budget. And then some other items, repairs and engineering. Next. The Stormwater Fund collects money to help deal with rainwater and storm events that happen in the city. The largest item there is capital projects, and that's because we're doing, in this particular year, proposing a community
pond, which is also a detention basin, a joint shared purpose facility, and that's why this year there's a large capital project that we'll be talking about a little more. Besides that, personnel is about 13%. Depreciation, once again, that retained earnings money that we're saving for future infrastructure needs is still the largest item besides the capital projects. Motor pool rents, you'll see that on a lot of them. That's the money that each department pays to the city motor pool to help pay for maintenance, replacement of vehicles on a periodic basis as they get older. So the motor pool is a central fund that every city activity pays into to have their vehicles maintained. Next. And lastly, our solid waste fund, our garbage and recycling fund, is our fourth utility. You can see the garbage fees are the largest piece of it, and that's the money we pay the vendor to actually go around and collect the cans. Then there's also transfer station fees, the money we pay to have that refuse disposed of at the Weber County landfill or transfer station. Those are the two largest items of this fund, and then personnel at 10%, and then a few capital projects and the same fees and expenses that I've talked about in the other ones. So that's where the money's going in each of our city utility funds. Next slide, please. So at this point, we've talked a lot about this year. There's some proposals to have our utility fees increase for the purposes of depreciation, or another word for that is infrastructure repair and replacement. You've seen that that's a line item in the expenditures of each of the funds. Councilman Lynn Satterthwaite has been doing a year-long review with our Public Works Director, Dave Espinoza, who's here, and his team of where our city stands on this idea of depreciation. Are we saving enough money in our monthly fees each month in order to be able to pay for our future infrastructure needs? And so I've got a couple of the slides in here. Councilman Satterthwaite, would you like to cover these and just discuss a little bit about your findings?
So recognizing the fact that there's a couple of people here who haven't heard this before, but the fact that we're online, it's worth mentioning that what initiated this study or this research into what it costs to repair, replace, or maintain, we're going to call them assets, in the city began a couple of years ago when we had stewed over a budget. This council approved a budget. We discussed it at some length, sometimes $5,000 line items. And once we got that approved, thought we were home free. And then 3 or 4 months into the year, we learned that about 1,800 of the water meter radios in the city had gone out. And so we were faced with about a $450,000 to $450,000 expenditure that we weren't counting on. So we had to ask ourselves the questions, so why does this happen? And basically the answer is that we knew people in the city, in Dave's department, knew about those. We all kind of knew about them, but did we realize that they were at the end of life? Were we keeping track of these assets in such a way that we would be aware when they needed to be replaced? So we embarked on the journey of trying to identify all of the assets in the city. Think about not only water meter radios, but water meters. Think about street segments. Every street in this town, we describe it as a segment of, and the same thing with water lines and storm drains and sewer. Those are some of the major ones. We talk about trucks and vehicles and buildings, and basically, this city really is a business that's probably worth in excess of $70 million. And what we did was to do some magic. David and his guys, Espinoza and his guys, did some magic with the tools that we have, with GPS and with the GIS system to be able to identify locations of all the manholes in the city, that identify the ends of these segments, and a lot of other items in the city. And we ended up with long lists in a spreadsheet that basically identify by line item a large percentage of the assets in the city. Along with the identification of an asset, we had to know when the asset was put in place, when did it begin its life, how long do we expect it to live. So we then would know when we have to repair or replace or maintain that, and then we'd also have to make some estimate as to what it would cost at the end of that lifespan of the asset. So the compilation of all that information has led us to a realization that we have a lot of infrastructure out in the city. I'm going to call it infrastructure, but it's composed of all these assets that we really don't have enough money saved to be able to repair, replace, and maintain those as we should. So this slide and several others we'll discuss. Maybe we'll do this slide, maybe go to the end. Let's go back to that one slide, to the first one. So, as an example here, a truck, one of the snowplow trucks would cost $180,000 last 15 years. So, we should be saving about $180,000 divided by 15, or that bottom line there says $12,000 is what we ought to set aside, so that when that truck is worn out, we have the money in place to go buy a new truck, and we don't have to go and scrape and scrap for money to just replace the assets that are key to just doing the business as a city. Just providing water and sewer and storm drain and keeping the roads clear. And so we can go on. Let's just see the next slide, and maybe we'll. So, yeah, not an exact approach. The real question is, how long will an asset last? And we're still struggling with that, though we think we've got a pretty good handle on it. Does a water pipe last 50 years or 100 years? When will it go out? And so we have it's not an exact science, but we've used what we think are the best numbers for both the lifespan and for the cost to replace or repair or maintain. Let's go on to the next one. So here's the depreciation totals, and you'll see down through that list, we've been somewhat all inclusive, but there's still none of the trucks are in there. There's still a lot of items on the depreciation list that are not listed there, but you can see that we're talking about a little over $12 million is what we should be setting aside in order to be able to have the money for that. Now, we've since refined some of the criteria and the lifespan of some of our infrastructure, and so that number's gone down, but the number is still a large percentage of just our annual budget. I think the number we'd ended up with was between $3 and $4 million, and you've noted from the mayor's discussion that our budget is $7.4 million. So it represents a significant kind of risk to the city, and you'll find in later discussions that this council has taken steps to try to deal with this problem and to start getting the money together so that we're in a better position to not be surprised by 1,800 water meter radios in the future. Let's go ahead to the last of whatever those slides are. I think we can be done. Yeah. So back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Satterthwaite. So that is a very brief overview of a very complex and detailed process that Councilman Satterthwaite has led over this last year, and it started several years before then, to arrive at this review that the city's been going through of if we are saving enough from our monthly utility fees to pay for the future infrastructure needs of the city. That's something that's getting talked about, in communities across the United States. It's something the president is talking about: infrastructure, bridges, pipes. It's all out of sight, out of mind until there's a problem with it. So we're trying to, as a city, have enough savings on the front end to avoid surprises like Councilman Satterthwaite mentioned, or hopefully to avoid the need for issuing bonds and going into debt and paying interest to make these kind of infrastructure repairs that are in the city's future. So with that, we have some proposed utility rate increases that are not all due to this concept of infrastructure, but we're going to kind of break it down. And there's a sheet you have, ladies and gentlemen, we've got it online as well, that shows the utility rate increases, and then in that green box kind of explains, what is from where. So let's look at what the proposals are. This chart up here, and it's in the document you have, has the current rates on the far left. Then this was the proposal that we had put together with the City Council on April 11th, and then what is actually in the tentative budget. And there's some slight modifications there, Council, that not in the total, but in which fund certain things came out of. And that's because we've changed where a couple of employees were accounted to better account for our employees in all the funds. So the proposed increase adds to $5.11 total. You can see where that gets broken down. And then in the sheet on the right side, in that green box, I just kind of break down, where the pieces are. So 87 cents of that is in garbage, and most of that is completely out of our control. That's Weber County. If you've read the newspaper lately, there's been some major management issues at the transfer station. It's millions of dollars in debt and has raised fees on the cities to pay the county back all that lost money from mismanagement. So unfortunately, that's something we have no control over. So largely that is what's happening with the 87 cents for garbage. There's a little bit there for employees as well, because again, we've reaccounted where some employees were being paid, like our utility clerk, for example. She was being paid entirely out of the water fund when really she's doing work for all those utilities. So we spread that employees' wages across all the utilities to better account for where, that what that employee is doing. So that's the 87 cents in the garbage. The 80 cents in stormwater proposed increase is almost entirely related to requirements from the Utah Division of Environmental Quality and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. We had an audit in our storm drain system, and although we passed the audit, we were mandated by the EPA and their local representatives, the DEQ, to make a number of changes in things like street sweeping, how often we sweep the streets to keep things from getting into the gutters, cleaning out our storm drain boxes, so all those leaves that collect at the bottom of the street and go into the grate, those have to be cleaned out more often under these requirements. And basically, we need to get to the point over the next few years that we have more personnel in the storm drain department to meet all these EPA requirements. So that's where that is really coming from there. The 41 cents for the sewer fee is having a 60 cent proposed increase, and then a 41 cent to Central Weber. That one is also the 41 cent part completely out of the city's control. That's a higher fee from the Central Weber Sewer District because they have a bunch of new EPA requirements to take phosphorus out of sewage waste streams. There's a lot of phosphorus that ends up in sewage from runoff from fertilizer, not necessarily from humans, but runoff water especially is the largest cause of it. Someone's grass, the phosphorus is in there, and that runs off and gets into the sewer system, and that has to be removed out chemically at the plant. So the Central Weber Sewer District is going through a massive upgrade to be able to pull those chemicals out. So that's that 41 cents there, something unfortunately we cannot control. The 60 cents, however, is for that repair and replacement that Councilman Satterthwaite was talking about. And then lastly, the water amount, all of that is programmed to be part of the infrastructure repair and replacement, saving for future infrastructure needs. So that is where our utility rate increases proposed at $5.11 come from. And then you can see in these other columns how much more money that is going to provide for that repair and replacement. And examples of that, like I say, there's 3 water lines this year that we're proposing to replace. They have water lines that have lived their lifespan. It's time for them to get replaced. So that is where we have that money on hand, don't have to bond for it, and are able to do those projects. So those, next slide, please. Just comparison, and you've got this one too in your sheet. This is just for comparison purposes, kind of shows where our city utility rates sit versus other cities. It's always kind of nice to know where does the city sit compared to other cities. And North Ogden has among the very lowest rates. And if you look on the water side, one of the reasons for that is we, as a city, provide our own water. We have our own wells. We have great production in our wells, and that enables us to offer water at a great cost compared to most of our other cities in the county that are buying water from another water entity. It also gives us great tasting water because we pull it right out of the ground here, it goes right into our system, doesn't run through pipes through like 3 other cities to arrive at its destination. So that's one of the main reasons we have such low rates, is because we have our own in-house water here in North Ogden City, and they do a great job. And we're always working on new wells. In the last 5 years, we've dug 3 new wells, 2 of which we got water, 1 of which unfortunately was dry. But that's one of the things that we do to make sure we always are staying ahead of the need. So we have 2 wells that are not currently being used, but will get tapped into in the future as the city grows and needs more water. So we're in great shape as far as our city water. Okay, next slide, please. There's 2 last parts of the presentation here, and you've got a copy of this on the very front page. There's some select highlights from all the departments. We just put a few highlights from each department, kind of to give you a flavor of some of the major things that are happening in each department. One thing I'll mention, across a lot of our departments, we're trying to use part-time personnel where possible to save on benefit costs. So that's something we're really working on this year. 2 new snow plows in our Public Works Department. We're going to lease those. Are a big step forward for the city to have some additional snow plow capacity, especially if we have another heavy winter like this last one. A lot of things happening in parks. Remote control sprinklers all hit. That's a great step forward. We're in phase 2, right, Tiffany, our Parks and Recreation Director, of how many phases? 3? So 2/3 by the end of this year, roughly, of our sprinklers will be on remote control. So if it's raining, we can turn those off easily. Instead of 2 years ago, we had none of them in that kind of a capacity. So this is a great step forward for some better water conservation. A new skate park, volleyball courts. We're going to be updating our impact fees across all city departments. A lot of developments, as I mentioned. We're going to be reorganizing City Hall to be more efficient with our employees. We'll talk a little bit about that. We've got some raises program for our city workers, which I'm proud of, because we've got great workers here, and we save a lot of tax dollars by retaining our great workers versus what we had happening in the city some years past was a lot of workers coming and then leaving within a year or 2, and that's extremely expensive. It's far cheaper to retain our employees than be training new ones constantly for other cities, for them to go to another city. Our roads, we'll talk a little bit about. Streets, we got a lot of projects planned for this year, and then some big projects as well. And best news, I know I hit utility rates, kind of depressing, but no property tax increase. North Ogden City has not had a property tax increase. I think this is year 9 with no property tax increase. So the budget, is very healthy. Our utility fees, why we need an increase, is for infrastructure. Okay, next slide, please. So the police, just wanted to show you just real quick a little representation of how much our calls for service is increasing in our police department. From just 10 years ago, about 8,000 calls a year. And this 2016, our last year that we of course have the full data for, not quite doubled, but a significant increase. So over 13,000 calls made to the police department in a year for services. Next slide. And this just kind of shows that same in a little different format, but there's a large increase in the number of calls that we're having into the police department. And that's one of the reasons we need that new part-time administrative assistant to help out in the police department. Next slide. Next slide. Our parks, same thing. We're introducing 2 new part-time employees to help keep up on our parks. The number of parks we have, you can kind of see here, 65 acres, 12 parks, 9 playgrounds, 38 benches, 3,600 sprinkler heads. It's a lot of sprinklers to keep track of. And all that, we just have 4 full-time employees. So we're going to be getting a couple more part-time employees to help out, and then they have a mowing crew as well that's there in the summer. Next slide. I already kind of mentioned about the irrigation, but we're really excited to see that phase 2 moving forward to get more of the sprinklers on those remote controlled systems so that we have a little bit more control over them without having to be physically there. Next slide. The skate park is right now getting relocated to North Ogden Park. The property back here is going to become part of the new and improved library, which they'll be starting on later this month. So that's why the skate park's getting moved, and Weber County is paying for almost all of the cost of relocating this skate park, which I picked up the check this week. So it's all happening. We're happy to report. Next slide. This is just a little picture of, if you think the northeast corner of North Ogden Park where the museum is, a lot of the Cherry Day stuff happens right here. Here's the Parks and Recreation office. The volleyball courts are going to be relocated from down here, kind of on the west side of the park, up to the northeast corner. And there'll be a 3rd volleyball court added. That's getting worked on right now. Next slide. There's been a ton of road projects done this year. I won't go through them all, but I think as I drive around the city, because I drive around a lot to other cities, I'm very proud of how our roads are looking compared to most of the other cities, even around here. I mean, excellent condition. Yeah, there's some potholes and things, but not nearly what I see in a lot of other places. That's because we've been able to do a lot of road work. We've got a great team that does a lot of work on there. We do our own crack sealing. And here, just to give you a quick picture, is the road work for next year. Next slide, please. I know this map is kind of small, I apologize, but the chip seal is the yellow, and that's probably the easiest one to see. Got some up here around west side of 3100, 450 east here, northern piece of that, some of our larger roads. We're going to get the new chip seal that's been done on last year on 1050, 2 years ago on 2600, last year on 1700, 2100. The chip seal really helps extend the life of the road. We're going to do a leveling course to smooth out the road, take away some of those bumps, and then get those new chips that should last 4 to 6 years and add all that lifespan onto the road. Basically, we do our maintenance to try and avoid having our roads get to the level or the deterioration that they need to be rebuilt, because that's 20 times the cost of putting a chip seal down every 5 or 6 years and keeping that lifespan going. So we do a lot of preventative maintenance. The other colors I know are really hard to see, but come see me if you'd like to see a copy. But we've got crack seal going on, slurry seal, overlays, all kinds of different treatments of different areas of our city to keep the roads in good condition so they're not getting to that point of deterioration and needing to be actually replaced. Next slide. Lastly, last part of this presentation is just a couple of major projects I wanted to mention that we're working on, and they're in the handout I've given to you on the back as well. So one major project is the intersection of 2600 North and 450 East, our main intersection here. Unfortunately, 450 East has multiple names, 400 East, Washington also. So basically our main intersection right here is a major project. Can you go to the map first? Next slide, please, John. So we'll be doing an open house just about this intersection project, but here's a quick overview of what is coming up. This is going to be a 3-part project, and it's going to start in spring of 2019 is the planned start date for this construction. So there's 3 pieces. The intersection itself is going to be widened and improved. Some dual left turn lanes put in different legs of the intersection. For example, Washington going east on 2700 North will have 2 left turn lanes so that more people can get through that light and people won't be stacked up so far south with just 1 left turn lane. There'll also be from 2700 North going north up the hill, there'll be dual lefts as well, so that more cars can get through that intersection as well, especially in the evenings when people are coming off the freeway. So the intersection itself is going to be widened and improved. Phase 2 of that project is here on 2600 North, basically from City Hall here to Washington Boulevard is going to be widened with an additional travel lane on the north and the south side. So a new travel lane going east, new travel lane going west, which will help improve the flow at the actual intersection itself because now there's more cars able to go through every light. Also, it'll help in this commercial area as the new Ace Hardware comes online, some of the new stores here that are going to be built, it's going to be getting busier, and these new lanes will provide some extra capacity. So the lane that's going east here will end at 475, the street right out here, as a turn lane, a right turn lane. So, and then the third phase of the project will be widening Washington or 450 East up to 2850 North, and then realigning 2850 North and Alberta Drive where there's that offset intersection. 2850 North intersects Washington at one point, and then slightly to the north, Alberta Drive comes in. That creates a lot of confusion for drivers if they're needing to cross there. So that intersection will actually be realigned, and there'll be a new lane north and a new lane south in that whole area. So previous slide, please, John. This is a project we've been working on for a long time to get funding. Here's the costs, and I'm not going to go through it all, but if you want more info, we'd love to share it with you. It's about $10.5 million project, and we've been able to obtain about $8 million in grants, federal, state, and local grants towards this project. And the city itself, our city, is only going to be putting in about $2 million of this project. So it's going to be a good project, spring 2019. But this year, we're doing a lot of the acquisitions of property, and that's why it's in this budget discussion tonight. We're going to be buying the properties that are needed to do this widening. Okay, next slide. Next, one of the other major projects. Yeah, let's start on the next one, please. A community pond I mentioned earlier. That's part of the storm drain budget. We have right now, if you think on 2700 North, if you're heading out to the freeway, if you pass Walgreens, you pass America First, you got that open property right there, and then there's the big city detention basin. It's about 7 acres of property that was built before 2700 North existed, and now it's occupying prime commercial frontage on the state highway, which could be used for commercial purposes. So we're moving that basin to the proposed location is the old Shooting Star Ranch property near Montessori School, and build a basin that will also be shared with Pineview as a reservoir and will be able to be a community pond. Likely, we're still trying to figure out what that will mean. Maybe fish, maybe not, but definitely a place where families could have a picnic, a get-together, take a canoe out, take a paddle boat out, take a kayak out, and use the community pond. So that's the long-range plan, and then it'll also be where all that detention water will go, so we can sell that property on 2700 North and turn it into a productive piece of property instead of a detention basin. So that's a big project. We're working closely with Pineview to get that done. Next slide. Our other major project this year is the Barker Park Amphitheater. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this map kind of shows, if you can see just underneath the old amphitheater, the existing amphitheater, I'll call it. So we're proposing significantly expanding the amphitheater, a much larger stage, putting on a proscenium for better performances, to be able to get better performances into the city. And we had a great success with the show we did last year, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And it had always been intended that the amphitheater would be expanded. The budget hasn't been there. It's kind of sat for a number of years. But the electrical that was put into here, there's a lot of things put into here when the council first did it in the early 2000s that now we're trying to expand the amphitheater and take advantage of and be able to bring some other cultural events and shows and things into our city. We've obtained a grant from Weber County, a ramp grant of $320,000. And great work on that from our Parks and Recreation Director, Tiffany Staley. And so next slide, we're basically now designing a stage that will eventually have a shell. This is just an example. It's not necessarily that it will look exactly like this one, but these are just some examples of amphitheaters like that. And we're proposing this year to do the phase 1. If you'll go back to the previous one, please, John. That will be the concrete work and the restrooms and carving out a seating area, putting the concrete down there. The seats won't be there. That'll be a future phase. This is going to be done a little bit at a time as we have the budget. But this first phase will ultimately produce a much larger stage and amphitheater that can be used, and a seating area, and the site work and the design work for the future phases, which will include the actual building structure to go on to the amphitheater. So that's being funded with a ramp grant, and then some city money from our parks impact fees are paying for almost the entire project, which is the money that, again, new homes, when they come into the city, they pay a fee towards our parks department, and that fee is used for new parks, has to be used for new parks, such as this new improvement to our park. Next slide. And next, lastly, I'll just mention the City Hall remodel. I told you we're changing things a little bit here. Right now we have our desk right here at the front, and then one downstairs for planning and zoning. We're going to consolidate all that up here, and downstairs will just be offices so that we don't have to have as much staff to keep both of those desks manned from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're going to consolidate the administrative staff here in this one office and have a little bit more of a kind of a administrative pool approach where we help each other out and get administrative things done. So there's going to be a little remodel of the city to that end to make a couple more offices as well, because we have some new positions and new people coming. And so that's what's going to be going on at the city. Ultimately, we feel it's actually enabling us to take advantage of some retirements by not filling the the retired positions, basically eliminating, in a sense, those positions and having some savings, which will offset some of the other personnel changes that we're doing. Next slide. And then that's just of the downstairs. The last one I'll mention is on your sheet. I didn't put it in here, but it's in the bottom right corner. There's a large project. You'll see it going on right now on Washington Boulevard to add new streetlights. There's 31, Dave? 31 new beautiful streetlights. You can see the design there. That'll be going in this northern piece of Washington this year, and then another similar amount, about 30 more, in the next budget that will go from 2,300 to 2,000. And then in the next couple of years, we'll finish that and have new streetlights up and down Washington Boulevard that are going to be really beautiful things for the community. They'll have the flower baskets, just add a little color, little beauty to our commercial area, and then the banner arms as well. So those are just part of our ongoing beautification program for the city. So with that, that concludes the budget presentation. And now we'd just like to invite anyone that has any questions for myself or the city council, please come on up to the microphone. We just ask for your name and address as part of the minutes of the meeting, and then we'll answer the questions.
Nobody clap. Steve Rasmussen, 1092 East, 3250 North. I just had a quick question on this community pond. Most of the detention basins around the city dry up, at some point in time because they drain them out to different places. So is this where all of the runoff is going to end up? How is that level of the pond going to be maintained, or how is it going to be maintained?
Thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. Good question. Yes, because most of our basins will have water for a day or two, at the most 3 or 4 after a storm, and then they dry out. So that's where the partnership with Pineview comes in. Pineview, of course, provides our secondary water, and they have a need for a reservoir that will have water through the whole season from April to October to be able to provide sprinkler service to North Ogden and Pleasant View. So we and Pineview would share the cost of building this. Their water would be in the reservoir through the whole growing season, and then the detention water would come in just when there's storms and could then be drained or evaporate out, but the Pineview water will still be there.
So they're going to pipe Pineview water down to this pond to keep that in there. And I assume
It would
because
go up and down every night as
Right.
people turn on their sprinklers and get refilled.
right. This is kind of in the flatland, so they're pumping out water to go up, or are they just draining it out to the people down below, or?
Some of both. They're planning on using it basically for a stretch, and John, correct me if they've said anything new. I wasn't at the last meeting with them, but basically in that band of properties north and south of that area, kind of on the west side of our city, east side of Pleasant View, is who would be serviced by this reservoir.
So the reservoir up higher on the mountain up above 1050 there wouldn't have to have as much water in it, wouldn't have to drain
Right.
as much. Okay.
Because as our cities grow, North Ogden and Pleasant View have a lot of growth in the area. They need a new reservoir because their current ones just can't keep up with the demand. So that's where it would be a partnership with both of us. The city would own it, but Pineview will help substantially in the cost of construction, and then it would serve both of our needs.
And this is planned in this year's budget, or this goes out?
The first phase is, we're planning, if everything works out, if Pineview, if everything works out on their end, their board gives final approval, our council gives final approval, the first phase would be done in spring of 2018, which would be actually digging the pond and getting it operational as a reservoir. It would not yet be our storm basin until we're ready to sell that property on 2700 North, and we would use the proceeds from that sale to then finish phase 2 of the basin and get it fully operational.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Jenkins.
Jeff Jenkins, 2892 North, 750 East. Just wondering what the plans are for North Ogden City for renting pickleball courts.
Let's ask our Parks and Recreation Director, who's right here. She probably gets this question a lot, and welcome, Tiffany Staley. Can you give us a update? I know we're definitely talking about it. Tiffany, can you come on up and just in the microphone so everyone can hear online, but pickleball courts.
Absolutely. We do get a lot of requests for pickleball courts. In the improvements for Barker Park that we have in the north section of the park, we have some pickleball courts planned there as well. And we also have a location at Lowman View Park where we would like to put some pickleball courts. So they are in the plans, and hopefully we'll be able to get those in soon.
How much, just so council can keep kind of in mind, do you think a court is, or 2 courts, or?
I want to say, if I remember the numbers we had, Matt draw them up for us, it's $90,000 for 2 courts. But what we're looking at is, as we talk to other cities that have pickleball courts, like Pleasant View has just put them in, 2 courts is not sufficient. 4 courts is not sufficient. And so we're kind of looking around to see what the number is that you could actually hold competitions on or make them useful, because Pleasant View's courts, all I hear about them are complaints that they're full all of the time, that people are always there. So we're looking very carefully at the areas around to see what they've got going on to make sure that when we put them in, that they'll be adequate for our population.
By the way, that's a good complaint to have, that they're full all the time instead of they're empty.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Tiffany?
thank you, Tiffany.
If I remember right, the tennis courts up at North Ogden were painted for pickleball. I know the net's too high and stuff,
That's
but they
correct.
are painted for it, so
Yes.
they're higher than pickleball courts. So
I was wondering if there's a chance they could just get a temporary net in there for a couple of years. This is a 2-year project out, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not in this year's budget, so it would be, yeah, two years, at the soonest if it was put in next year's budget. So is there any retrofit that can be done on our current ones, or
Right
you
now,
would
there's
lose the
not.
tennis?
We would lose tennis.
So, but there are areas we have identified for them. It's just when we have the funds to do it. So,
most of the courts down in St. George were groups of 6, is what I noticed when I was down there. So
17 courts in Brigham.
you must play a lot, Mr. Jenkins.
It's fine.
It's fun, yeah.
okay, other questions or comments? Mr. Wynn, welcome.
Andy Wynn, 2412 Barker Parkway. I just wanted to congratulate the mayor and the council on forward thinking and financial prudence. I mean, you're doing some things so our city will be in good shape in years to come, not just for 1-year budget. And also to congratulate the progress on making our city look more like an individual city with these street lights and the other benches and things that have been put in. It gives us a little identity, and I think with the amphitheater and all these things are enhancing our city, and I think it's a wonderful thing and give us a little identity as well. I'm in favor of all this.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn.
I just would like to ask one more question. You don't need my name again, do you?
Mr. Rasmussen, just because the minutes person,
Okay.
she does it all off audio, so.
Steve Rasmussen, 1092 East, 3250 North. I know that there are a lot of plans that have been talked about for the ground that really is where Barker Park is. The ground that's there for it is much larger than what's been improved in any way, shape, or form. I know there are plans for that kind of stuff, and it's, I think, supposed to remain as kind of a green space rather than, parks where you're going to play team sports and all of those some of those things. But I was wondering, as we start going forward with this, obviously, it's going to take money to do improvements if you're going to put in Boweries for picnics or whatever you might have. But would it be possible to start out maybe with just having all of that agricultural property start turned to grass? I know that presents maintenance problems and stuff like that. But if we could have a lot of that turned into grass, you could, families could go down there, do some things, have have a place to let their kids run and play and stuff like that. I didn't know exactly where the plans are for Barker Park, but just wondering how quickly some of those other improvements were going to happen, and if we could at least start thinking about getting some grass down there and making it an open area for people to just go down and with their families and whatnot and run and play, do whatever they do.
And thank you, Mr. Rasmus. I'm pulling up the map. That's why I'm talking, not ignoring your questions, just to answer what you'd asked. And it's a very large file, so bear with us for a second. So, yes, the area of Barker Park is about 5 or 6 times larger than what has been improved right now as the park, and our map will be coming up. So this area shows all of the Barker Park land. This is 2600 North. This is Fruitland Drive. You can just kind of see a little bit of here. This is Barker Parkway, which runs into 1050 East to kind of orient everyone. So we had a committee that involved myself, several of the council members, a lot of the Barker family, and then our Parks and Recreation Director and Chairman of our Parks Committee. And this committee worked up a recommendation for how to use the remainder of the land, and I'll just show a few of the highlights. Part of it was a splash pad, a high adventure park, a educational amphitheater, like a kind of a log seat amphitheater for school groups to come, a barn from the Campbell Barn on 2600 North. We're proposing bringing that here as kind of an educational thing. So there's a lot of things. Pickleball courts, volleyball courts are some of the other pieces here. As you said, not organized sports. It's intended to be a family park. There will be sporting fields and things, grass areas for families, but not organized competition or recreational sports activities. So that is the long-term plan for the park. It includes this island piece here, and then keeping a lot of the trees. And then the existing amphitheater is right here, just a little bit off this map. The committee recommended to the council that we do some improvements at the amphitheater, since we already have that, and help generate more usage of this park. And then over time, once the amphitheater has been expanded and improved, we're going to start working on some of these other pieces. So it is a long-term project because of the cost. I think it was almost $7 million for all of these pieces. And it needs to be timed right, because the fact that it's being farmed is helpful at this point, so we don't have a giant weed field that the city needs to take care of. So the future phasing of the park, once we've completed the amphitheater, which we hope will be in the next 3 to 5 years, then we'll be focusing on doing these other pieces in some phasing that's not yet been conclusively determined.
So we're not going to see grass anywhere for quite a while. I mean, it's going to continue to be agriculture.
For at least a few years, yes, because the maintenance would be a lot for us to take on. This area is about 29 acres, I believe, left, which our current parks is 65 total. So it's a very substantial area. Not that it would be all grassed at one time, but
Yeah.
it would be a significant maintenance addition right now. So that's kind of why our plan is to finish the amphitheater, and then maybe it'll be this piece first, maybe it'll be this southern, southwestern piece. There'll be some phasing determined to start doing the pieces of the park to complete them. Also, we're trying to see if we can get any support maybe from fundraising or businesses or people to, improve that schedule I just gave.
We would be willing to name it the Rasmussen Pickle Courts, if you'd like.
Well, I don't know pickleball, but it looks like a good.
Get him involved. That would be
prospect
the Jenkins
Yeah.
pickleball courts at Rasmussen Park at Barker Park.
Yeah, and if I had deep pockets, I would surely contribute to something like that, because I think that whole idea to have a much nice and better improved area just for families would be a wonderful thing for the city. And as quickly as that can happen, I know there are a lot of money constraints involved, but as quick as that could happen, it would be a good thing.
Well, and here's your chance, Mr. Rasmussen, if you'd like to recommend to the council to do a bond or something on Barker Park, we have looked at that as well. But
Well, I would recommend, and yeah, please do that. I mean, I understand. I understand bonding is oftentimes frowned on, but I had when I was a very young man, an older gentleman gave me a piece of advice. He said, if you want to have a house, you're going to have to get a loan for it. But if you buy a house, the best thing you can do is not spend all your money on the house and leave a little, so that what you can do is make principal payments on the house. And instead of having it for 30 years, you can pay it off in 15 or 10 or however much money you save. I think that same principle would apply to a bond. Right now, I think the city is a fairly financially sound city, and that is probably good. Is because of the management from the city council. But at some point in time, maybe there are things like roads or maybe parks or some of those things where not large bonds, but bonds for a specific period of time for a specific project, and as those are paid off, others can be added. So maybe it's something that ought to be considered at least. And if that park could be finished a lot faster because of it, I think it would be good for North Ogden.
Well, Mr. Rasmussen, you have to stop just a little bit to look and see what happened when we bonded for a swimming pool. And we're indebted for that for a long time, and it doesn't come anywhere near close to paying for itself. So you got to have some kind of revenue to pay a bond off, and a park is not going to furnish you a revenue to pay that bond off.
Very few things do furnish revenue to pay a bond off. I understand that. But we can wait 20 years for that park if we want to.
If we do, my kids will enjoy that, and
Your grandkids, maybe. I don't know.
or we could turn it into a cemetery. Who knows?
Well, that would benefit you. I'm going to live to be 1,000, so it won't benefit me, but that would benefit you. So that would be a good thing. Anyway, just my 2 cents. Thanks.
thank you, Mr. Rasmussen.
No, he gave a quarter's worth.
Okay, there's just one last thing I'll mention really briefly. I'm sorry I didn't cover it before, but in the front page of the handout, in the bottom right corner, there's a light red box that has the fund reserves of each fund projected at the end of this budget we're talking about, which will be July or June 30th of 2018. So why that matters is it's an indication of the financial health of the city, the amount of fund balance that we have. The general fund, nearly 1.5 million, which is approximately 20% of the expenditures of a year in the general fund. We have a separate Proposition 1 transportation fund where we're putting the sales tax dollars that came from Proposition 1 being passed in Weber County, and that's about $375,000 projected to be in there, and that'll be used for the road project. Capital projects has 734. The motor pool funds are low, and the council's talked about that. We're trying to get those better funded. The RDA fund, which is our redevelopment agency fund for economic development, has approximately 1.2 million. However, that is making some loans to the CDA, Community Development Area Fund, which does not yet have any revenues. Our water fund, sewer fund, stormwater, solid waste, you can see the fund balances in those. And then lastly, two new funds we've started in the last couple years are our Transportation Utility Fund and our Transportation Impact Fee Fund. And we're taking several $100,000 out of those this year to fund the work that I mentioned on the intersection project, and still will have nearly $500,000 in those two funds combined. So that's just information for benefit of our citizens of what the financial health of the city is, and it's extremely healthy. The city has strong reserves for emergencies, for things that come up. That's due to conservative budgeting practices from our city council for many years. So just a little information there. With that, council, is there anything any of you would like to add about the budget or discuss to add to this presentation before we move into the active agenda items? Okay, so we'll go to our active agenda items. We just had our comment period. So we have two items on tonight's agenda. They're both related to our budget. Our first, council, is a discussion about a cost-sharing agreement for public safety surviving spouse trust fund, and our city recorder and HR director, Annette Spendlove, will be the presenter on this.
Mayor and council, you received an agreement in the council packet, but let me explain a little bit about it. In 2015, the state legislature passed Senate Bill 288 that upon the line of duty death of a law enforcement officer or firefighter, the employer shall provide the surviving spouse and children health coverage under the employer's group health plan, as if the surviving spouse was an employee, and it would cover that spouse up till they were Medicare age, and it would also cover the children up to age 26. It was a voluntary plan, but we had to set money aside to be able to take care of it if we didn't go into the trust fund. They created a trust fund. And then in 2016, they changed and opened it up a little bit more that gave us the ability to volunteer to be part of that trust fund if we wanted to, with the cost-sharing agreement. And we would have to be part of that starting, we would pay for it by June 30th, 2017. And then it would cover if our public safety employees, if something happened, and we pay a year ahead. And when I called to ask what it would cost us, right now it would cost the city $95 times the number of employees we have, which is 18, annually, to be part of that trust fund. Then, this year, in 2017, they passed Senate Bill 156 that makes it mandatory for us to be part of this trust fund July 1st, 2018. Let me tell you how it works. If something happened to one of our public safety employees, then, and they were married and had a spouse and children, the city would be responsible for the first 24 months, which is 2 years, to pay an annual premium for that spouse and family. Right now, a family plan is about $15,000 annually. It's a high deductible health plan that they have for this. The trust is set up that way. And then at the 25th month, the city would still continue to pay, but they would reimburse us for that after that. So up until the age of the spouse was Medicare age or the children were 26. That agreement's before you right now. Do you have any questions?
Maybe you said this before I What fund would this come out of? Because about $1,800, right?
1710.
1710.
Oh, 19 employees, okay.
It'll come out of the general fund.
Around 1,800.
It'll be the general fund, and we
take
have
few.
it set up in
General
the
fund,
police
okay.
department.
And we have to do it next year, but we
Well,
don't have to do it right now.
We
Or
don't have to volunteer right now, but if something happened to one of our public safety, we have to fit that bill. The city has to pay that bill the entire life of the spouse until that spouse can go on Medicare. If something happened right now, between now and 2018,
Plus dependents until they're
Right.
26.
and the dependents till they're
And
26.
you can't add them later.
Yeah,
So
we can't add them later.
you need to be a part of this plan. I mean,
By
not,
July,
of course, we pray this never happens, but
Right.
if it did happen and we weren't in the trust fund, the city would be looking at $1 million liability potentially for the rest of us spouses.
the spouses.
Many
so-
years if it was a young spouse.
This is local public safety and firefighters. Since the fire department's a district, do the other cities pay do we have to pay a different amount for the district versus? I'm just curious. I'm not
I don't
sure
know
that
how
one
they
all would
decide
work.
who pays how much. Right now,
Northview Fire will have to join to.
every agency will have
So
to
Northview
join.
Fire would have to pay their own, we don't pay
Right.
for them.
Well, we
Well,
do out
no,
of the
we will
monies
pay
that
for it
go
through
to
our
the tax.
taxes.
Citizens,
As
yeah.
citizens.
But
Well, I understand it's taxes, but we're not gonna pay that for
No.
their employees.
This is
right
just
now.
for North Ogden's police department. And we have to pay our 2017, they opened it up for us by June 30th of this year for the next year.
So our recommendation, council, is that we pass it for this year, and then, of course, it'll be in the future budgets per state law, but we feel it's not that big of a cost for the potential, it's just an insurance to be involved in this trust.
Going in here.
The potential
So
cost,
we'd
yeah.
have to pay it now that will make it available for us June 1st. Well, it will cover us now if anything happened, if we get this in right now. And then next year, we'll have to do it again.
Do we need to open the budget?
This is included in the tentative budget.
For the next
For
year.
next year, but we have to have
But
it
we're
in
going
by
to have
June.
to open it up now, yeah.
So,
Well, did we have the funds, Evan? Did we say we could find those funds, the 19, what was it, 19?
1805.
1805?
I think would probably be okay without opening the budget.
Lynn mentioned earlier that we were really kind of surprised when we had all these radios, and this isn't a big expense, $1,805, but it'd sure be nice to know about these things way in advance so we could make some questions about them. Like, I'd like to know what insurance company's underwriting it.
I'm not sure. I know that it's public safety, the Department of Public Safety oversees this. There's a board and it's made up of county.
With all the problems that the state, our wonderful state auditor is finding with quasi-state units mismanaging funds, it'd be nice to have those kind of answers.
This is essentially a self-insured policy. It goes into a trust account, and the idea is that it accrues over years from everybody, and that the draw coming out of the fund for the officers' families is less than the amount going in. So it's essentially self-insured, and it's administered by, it's in the Department of Public Safety, but there's a specific board.
Okay, so how
that's set
much
up
would
for
go
it.
into that? How much is projected to go into that fund in the first year by all entities in the state of Utah that'll be paying into it?
They haven't said.
See, for you to tell me that money's gonna be there, it's a self-insured thing, I wanna know how much is in there. What if we bankrupt it the first year?
They have 140-something thousand in there right now.
That wouldn't last very long.
No,
If we had,
no.
if you just
Oh,
had
that
one
was actually
person per police force
That's
dying the
true.
line of duty, or hopefully we don't have that.
And
but,
that could be why they made it mandatory.
I think it is because there weren't enough cities joining in it voluntarily to make the fund economically sustainable. Plus, the legislature tried to make some changes that this insurance benefit would not continue if the spouse remarried and had new insurance, but that effort was defeated. And so this is a lifetime benefit regardless of whether the spouse has new insurance. So that has made it more expensive as well, and that's why I think, I don't want to speak for the legislature, but I believe is why they're making it mandatory to make sure there's enough contributions in there to make the trust fund viable. Councilman Turner and then Councilman Swanson.
Have we been paying into it before?
No.
Oh,
Okay. Go ahead, Phil.
Do we have an agreement number?
I still have a question.
Go ahead.
Councilman Satterthwaite?
So, in the event that we do, unfortunately, it would be unfortunate that we lose one of our public safety officers. The cost for that 24 months, is that the $15,000 a year, we think?
yes, it'd be
City's
about
gonna
30,000 total. We'd cover it for 2 years, 15,000 a year is what it would cost if we did it. I mean, if something happened right now to us.
And then this trust fund would kick in and we'd be reimbursed after
Correct.
that. So the second question, it looks like it's set up so that we make a one payment a year. Yes, it's based on some kind of a snapshot of the number of people that we are employing. What happens if, let's say, for instance, how many do we think we have? So we do 19, and we pay for them, and then during the year, Kevin hires 2 more people, and one of them is killed in the line of duty.
We're still covered. We just need to let
Doesn't
them know.
matter how many we add, it's
Just need
still a
to let 'em
one-time
know.
count, and then okay.
Yeah,
We've added
it's
one.
based on the number of employees on June 30th
Yes.
of the year.
So John, this is self-insured. They're not going to go out and reinsure like the insurance companies do.
Right. So I just Googled it really quick, and it said in 2008 there were almost 5,000 sworn police officers in the state. So just police officers, which means at $95 a piece, you're looking at almost 500,000 going into the fund just for police officers. You throw but that's 2008, so that's almost 10 years ago. And then you add fire folks as well. I mean, there's a good chance you're looking at approximately $1 million going into it a year.
So just to be clear, I think it's a wise expenditure because I think we've got some dedicated police officers and we ought to take care of those kind of things. But boy, I'd like to have more information on these kind of things when we're going to talk about them.
Well, and we say we ought to take care of them. State law says we are required
Yeah,
to take care of them.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah,
mandatory.
I agree, more information would be better.
And that, just one other thing, the insurance, self-insurance is why there's that 2-year delay period before the trust will kick in benefits, so that every year they can assess how many new, cases would be taken on and adjust the rates on a yearly basis based on any new cases.
Yeah.
Councilman Swanson.
Yeah, I appreciate the questions you guys have asked, and I'm all in favor of it because really what we're voting on is, do we do this for a year? Because next year we have to. We don't have a choice. And so do we cover our officers for a 1-year period of time? And I believe we do.
I do too, but another question that comes up for me, John, is this just covers if they're killed in a line of duty, or what if they're maimed for life and they don't, they can't.
Right now, it's
can't
just
work
if they're
anymore.
killed.
So that's what workers' compensation and the other insurance we have covers.
Okay.
So
Yeah, and this, correct me if I'm wrong, would be, like actually killed or a car accident or something else, correct? Any
Right.
line of duty, death on duty.
On duty.
Only on duty. Only on duty.
Right.
Okay. Does it cover our canine guy? Our canine dog? If he
We'll get him his own
if
policy.
he gets a wife and puppies or something.
He's staying a bachelor so he stays angry.
So now we need an agreement number?
Yeah.
I'll grab
Now we need an agreement number.
A11.
Mayor, I would move we approve agreement A 11-2017 For the local public safety and firefighter surviving spouse trust fund cost sharing for this next year.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the Public Safety and Firefighter Spouse Trust Fund Agreement. Is there any further discussion? We'll start the voting with Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Satterthwaite,
Yes.
Councilman Uri,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
and Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that motion passes unanimously, and we'll move on to item 3, which is discussion and/or action to consider a resolution for the North Ogden City tentative budget. And our finance director, Evan Nelson, will be the presenter here. I'll mention, council, our plan is to cover significant changes from the previous budget you've seen and any other items you wish to cover in greater detail. Evan.
Okay. So the tentative budget that was provided online and to the city council has 5 columns of numbers. We have a couple of prior year actual numbers, then a column showing the current year budget, a column showing the preliminary budget, which was discussed at our last budget retreat, and then the column on the right side is the proposed tentative budget that we are proposing adoption of tonight. So, since our last budget retreat, there have been some changes, and one of those was mentioned by the mayor. We did a reallocation of the utility clerk salaries. We have 1 full-time utility clerk plus another public works clerk full-time, and then we have 2 part-time utility clerks in the budget. So those salaries have been allocated across the utility funds as well as the streets department in the general fund, so that the expenses related to their duties are more appropriately charged to the departments where they should be. So the result of that is that there was a decrease of expense in the water fund and increase expenses in the other utility funds, because most of those salaries were housed in the water fund previously. Another change that we put into the tentative budget, you'll remember we discussed the taxation of fringe benefits, including clothing provided by the employer, swimming pool passes. The IRS regulates these sort of things and requires that they be reported as taxable income. And, we provide clothing to our employees, particularly employees that are working out in the field. We provide safety boots. We provide jeans and shirts, primarily so that residents can know that these workers are official workers. And of course, for the public works employees, they go through they wear out their clothes quite quickly, and so the city provides that. So as part of the budget change, we've put in a miscellaneous pay that would be 20% of the value of the fringe benefit.
Where's that on here?
So it doesn't show up it shows up in the salary lines. It's not an individual separate line, but it's been included in the salary lines. And the 20%, when we talked about trying to cover the cost of taxes that would be incurred by employees because of these fringe benefits, we discussed identifying an average amount that we could provide. It's not practical to try to calculate what the actual tax liability will be for each employee, because it will be different for each employee, and that liability isn't actually known until after the calendar year is over. So we put 20% as a kind of an average number, an estimate, and we've included that in the budget.
20% of what?
20% of the value of the fringe benefit. So if an employee receives a uniform that cost the city $100, the employee would receive an additional $20 in their paycheck to cover the taxes that they will be responsible for the value of the clothing. Some employees' tax liability would be higher than $20. Some employees' tax liability would be less, but we don't really have a way of knowing exactly what the liability would be.
And heretofore, when employees get W-2 forms, their salaries don't show the value of these benefits. Now they will.
Right. We're trying to bring this into compliance with the IRS regulation.
How do you determine what the value is? Is there a set guideline? I mean, do you say, okay, we're going to allow X amount of dollars per year, or is it just somebody goes and buys new boots and we say, well, we furnished them new boots? How do you determine that?
So the purchases are actually made by the city, and so we see the invoices and know what the costs are. The department managers have budgets for uniform allowance, and they manage, how much of that budget goes to each employee. And then, so as the city receives these invoices, department managers would let the payroll person know how much of each invoice is for which employee.
Let me ask you another question that crosses my mind, and maybe you don't have an answer, maybe you do, but we have on occasion, I think, paid for the cleaning of uniforms, have we not?
The officers are responsible.
No, over
At Public
at
Works.
over at your place, haven't we paid for cleaning of uniforms? Not.
We do like the rugs and all that.
So does that have to be taxed too?
So the taxable clothing is only clothing that is suitable for everyday wear, I think is the phrase they use. So I think the guys that work at the shop have coveralls that they put on at work, and I think we pay to clean those, but that's not really...
Are they taxable?
No, that's not something we would report as taxable. It would be the jeans, the polos, primarily those. I'm not sure what they provide at the pool. I think there's some lifeguard uniforms that would be part of that.
So, on page 8, there's a line item for uniforms. Is that different than what you're talking about?
So the line item for uniforms would be the budget that the city has to spend on uniforms.
Like the polo shirts?
Yeah, to actually pay for them.
And then we charge the employees for them as a fringe. Is that right?
We don't actually charge the employees, but we report the value as a taxable income to the employees.
And then the
I think
employee
that's
can
stupid,
wear
but
it
that's
for any
my
time
opinion.
they want to, right?
If it's something they could wear anytime or out and about, then it qualifies as a fringe.
Right.
Well, if it was a uniform shirt with the name of the city on it, that they're not gonna wear that out in public all over the place.
But they could. The IRS wants their cut.
Anyway, I think it's...
So I wanna know how many of our, I wonder if you could do an assignment for us, Evan. Could you find out how many of our congressmen are being taxed on these fringe benefits?
So how does, so Dave's got a shirt there that was given to him by the city. So he gets charged, he has to pay taxes on that shirt? Is that basically what you're saying, right? Or the city has to pay taxes on it?
Both.
It's so silly.
So how does that
I think he's
affect?
paying tax on this shirt right here.
does this thing affect it in any way? You know, I know that our state legislators and our congressmen, their entire, they don't pay one penny for health insurance. That's all given to them. How does this affect anything that we pay? Are the benefits that when we pay benefits for the employees, we pay what, 85% of their benefits? Is that considered any kind of a fringe benefit or not?
It's not taxable. It is a fringe benefit, but it's not taxable.
We're just beating up the messenger. You just understand.
No, I'm not beating the messenger even. I'm just trying to ask some questions. How does this affect, last year we passed a thing in the budget for city employees and councilman and mayor of an amount that we would pay for on a tablet or a phone. Are they taxable? Are those things taxable?
No. No, the code actually talks about those devices specifically, and if they're issued, provided for the purpose of accomplishing your job, then it's not taxable.
But let me just throw a thing to you about that I became aware of last week, okay? And you know, I work for the LDS Church, and when a mission president goes on a mission, the church furnishes him a laptop computer. And they used to allow those mission presidents to purchase the computer or take the computer at the end of 3 years. That will no longer be the case because of tax consequences.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. So that would lead me to believe that we may have a problem like that if an employee has a laptop or a tablet, or a councilman does, and they want to take that with them at the end, that there may be a taxable consequence for that. So you might want to look into that one.
Okay.
I'm guessing our city's kind of leading out on this kind of thing.
So, Evan, just a quick question. You made a statement there that, so if the tablet is non-taxable because it's needed for their work, why wouldn't their uniform be needed for their work?
It's just how it's outlined in the code. When you look at the fringe benefit guide, it's like 100 and something pages of.
Could you please send that to me? I want to read it.
We don't
no,
have
I don't.
we don't want to have
25
to read that
pages
again.
of shirts, just
So no, I just wow. It's just the way it's written. Okay,
It does get down to detail. They specify this is how you handle cell phones. This is how you handle uniforms. This is how you handle safety boots. So it's
pretty specific.
Quite
Is this
detailed.
driven by the federal government or the state government, or both?
Federal.
Federal.
You know we love you, Evan.
Evan loves this stuff, so that's why he brings it to us. But there have been, at least I know of one city, maybe there have been others that were deemed two, okay, and that mentioned another in audits for not taxing fringe benefits. So it is, I think we all agree, silly as many things the IRS has done, but it is good for us to be in compliance.
So is there a dollar amount that is acceptable to not? I mean, like a gift for, we're not supposed to have more than like
$25.
$50. I thought it was, but but I mean, is there an amount that isn't? I'm just curious. I just didn't know if there was or not.
We're going to give you the 125-page document. That'll answer all your questions.
Okay, I'm done.
In the document, there's a de minimis category. The IRS does not assign a dollar amount to de minimis. They say it depends on the circumstances.
So in other words, they can make the rules up as they go.
Thanks, dude.
I just want to know if Congress really made
So
We're spending a lot of money on this little amount.
So Carl, this is coming Big D's way too, so.
Oh, I'm sure.
These shirts you're wearing, you're gonna be taxed on now.
They charge us to buy them anyway. They don't give them to us. We have to buy them. That would be another option, but Let's move on, please.
Okay, so that's
Next item?
that's been included in the budget. The mayor emailed out our revised list of proposed personnel changes and salary changes. So that's also been included in this tentative budget. And we can answer any questions you have about that tonight as well. Those are the main kind
Snow
of
plow, Evan.
right.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry.
That one.
So those are the main overall changes that affect most of the departments. There are a few other major, or I guess larger changes that I'll highlight. Let's see.
We already decided on the snowplows, didn't we?
We did.
They're ordered.
They were ordered 10 minutes after the.
This is the snow plowing expenses, salt, time, overtime, blades.
Right. So we've had $50,000 in the budget to cover mainly salt and blades and those sort of things. And this winter we exceeded that budget, and at the retreat you had requested that we add $20,000 more. So an extra $20,000 is in the streets department. We accidentally put it to the road maintenance line, so we'll get that fixed. But the
So-
20,000 is there, it's just in the wrong line.
So you need to make a notation that we have talked for a couple of years now, that if next year we don't have a real heavy snow and so we have money, it stays in there.
Rolls over to
It
the
rolls
next
over,
year.
it is, and we don't find somewhere else to spend that. We don't say, well, if we had $25,000 left next year, we don't want to say, well, we got $25,000 to spend somewhere else. No, that stays in that fund.
So you're asking for it to accumulate?
That's right.
Is that what you'd like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor, just on this budget's available online for everybody, right?
Yes.
Now, is there a more detailed one? Because like you'd mentioned all the salaries that we talked about and stuff, where they were obviously more detailed when we talked about them. Are they more detailed online, or is it just
Not
because
the
it's just
salaries,
a group?
but the salaries for each department are, not by name.
Okay, so
Because, to be honest, some of the employees don't know we've proposed them.
I understand.
Or a raise
I'm
yet,
I'm
so-
okay with that. I just
But all the departments, by department, the full salaries are,
okay.
yes, just not by individual name.
Okay, thank you.
We increased the budget for the part-time building inspector. We've advertised that position, and feel like to be competitive in that market, we need to offer a higher salary. So we added about $5,000 to that. We also added $5,000 for contract building inspections. As we're going through a transition with the chief building official retiring, we had removed all of the money out of the budget for contract inspections and plan reviews, but felt like we ought to add 5,000 back in
Just for
as
a couple months, right?
as kind of right, yeah, kind of make sure we're covered there.
The personnel one, Evan, let's cover that, because that's, I think, a couple $1,000, right, or $4,000 change
Which personnel?
in administrative, personnel-related costs.
Oh, right, okay. Personnel-related costs, this is on page 3. It's line 1047,695. The current year budget is 9,640, and we had decreased that in the original budget discussions. And as we've gone through this year, we've needed more. I mean, we've needed to use that budget. And so we're proposing to make it equal to what it has been this current year rather than dropping it down. So
Increased it by 4,000.
by 4,000.
Well, we put it back to
Just
where
put
it
it
was.
back to last year's.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's equal to.
When we thought we were going to be very, we thought we were going to have to cut some areas more, so that was one we just had put as less. But we are able to do that. We have a surplus in the general fund, which is how we wanted to. We like to budget that way to be safe, and given that. For example, that additional $4,000 pays for our department head retreat that we do once a year. It's not really expensive. We got the location donated actually last time. It just cost a little bit of food and, but it's a time kind of to get the department heads together. Several of the council members' wives did breakfast for it a few years ago and vision things, make goals, get away from the office and talk about things for a day. It has some of our employee recognition programs that I think for the minimal cost, they've produced, a great camaraderie with the employees. So that's some of the things that we want to, put that back to the budget that it was before.
Okay. We have a change in the recreation department. This is related to football uniforms. In the past, for football uniforms, we have expensed we've purchased the uniforms out of an expense line, and then we've receipted payment for the uniforms straight into the expense line rather than receipting it into a revenue line. And so to more correctly show what's going on with those transactions, we've added an expense line for football uniforms. It's $1068,651. The label says football flag, but it's actually football uniforms, $7,000. And then we also increased the recreation revenue $7,000. So it's balanced there. But that way we'll be able to show the revenue and the expenditure rather than not being able to see the full activity there. That same concept.
Where does the 7,000 show up on what line for the revenue?
The revenue, it's just lumped into the recreation revenue line, which is
Page 8.
1034,700. So it went from 86,000 up to 93,000. That same concept was happening with lifeguard uniforms, and so, well, is Tiffany gone?
She's gone.
She's gone. Okay. I'm actually not sure how that's been happening, but when I talked with her in the future, we wanted to add the same thing in to the aquatic center, so we added $5,000 on the revenue side, $5,000 on the expenditure side for the lifeguard uniforms.
Is this something that that our annual audit would comment on or catch? I don't remember
Probably
that
not.
coming up.
I mean, they may notice it. It's small enough dollars that they may not give it a whole lot of thought. But in general, we should be recognizing the revenues and the expenditures rather than letting them wash. So that's what we're trying to do.
We could make our budget look really, really big. Just in every department, we just put a revenue and an expenditure, and they neutralize themselves.
Only at 28 pages, we could be at 200 in a heartbeat.
So, Devin,
Close.
let me ask you why,
Rhymes.
on page 9, we've got category 2236,950. I like to see revenues go up, but miscellaneous revenue for the pool is showing a $5,000 jump. What counts for that?
That's what I was just talking about. That's the employee paid uniforms.
Oh, that's the 5,000 there, on the revenue.
Right,
Do
and
they
then
pay for their uniforms then?
that's what I'm not sure about.
If they're not paying for their uniforms, we should not.
They do pay, okay.
They pay
I wasn't
the full
sure.
price for that? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was a new change or if that's how the current practice is, but, so.
Where's the expense on that one?
2269, 141.
Okay.
You'll notice that the utility billing revenues throughout the utility funds increased based on the new rates that we've discussed. So those are all incorporated into this budget.
In the water fund, the utility billing, does that include the tiered hillside pricing for the water?
We didn't incorporate that. I don't know what our strategy is on that, if we wanted to budget for it or just make the rate adjustment and see what it does. I don't know.
Because I don't think you're going to see a big impact on revenue.
For all rate things like that, we need to probably do a study, an actual formal thing before we budget for it.
Okay.
Just to show how the cost,
And that's in the works, correct?
Yeah, the engineer already did at least the first phase. I think there's, a little bit more that would need to be done, so let's do that.
The idea would be that when we redo the capital improvement plan or the impact fee improvement plan that is in the budget as well for water, that will be part of that discussion, and that'll be part of the project that they're in charge of, finalizing the data they've already got.
Okay.
We did talk about doing that sooner than later so that, it's in place before we see a lot more growth.
That can just be one of the first ones we do. We're going to do all 4 impact fees, besides transportation, and then the general capital projects and parks, so we'll work on that one.
So I have it on page 18. It's sewer fund, sale of asset, 20,000. What's that? Remind me.
Is it one truck? Sale of a truck.
And that 20,000 is a guesstimate. We don't. It may go for 15 or it could go for 25. I mean, just
Dave's gonna get us 25.
okay.
If he doesn't get us 25, we're gonna tax his uniform.
You be nice to Dave.
We're gonna get him uniforms for John Watson Chevrolet if he can get us 25.
Or whatever outfit we're gonna lease those trucks from. That's what.
Okay, any other changes, Evan, that we should mention from the preliminary budget we showed the council in April?
What's the returned earnings on, like, page 19, I think it says returned, almost 70,000.
So that's a result of the rate increase and contributing money for future infrastructure.
Okay, all right. That's just a change from before.
So we're
too.
not gonna call that depreciation, break that out as depreciation?
The depreciation is already broken out too.
Yeah, we have both.
Well, but if this 70,000 includes savings for future infrastructure, then it ought to be put into the depreciation.
Well, that's a discussion we need to have, whether we do it now. It's preliminary, but it has to be done for the next one, and that is still to decide where we actually set this aside, call it King's X. We only use it for certain things.
I think we had that discussion in April, and we said we wanted a depreciation fund, we wanted the money shown in the depreciation fund, and it was to be safeguarded.
So if you look at line 5240, 550, that's our depreciation expense in the sewer fund. We have $195,000 budgeted there, which it's called depreciation expense, but it's not a cash out expense. So essentially that line, by using that line, we're setting aside $195,000. Plus we add this $69,000 to that. So those two numbers combined are the amount that we have in the budget that is not being spent, that's being put aside for future use.
Why would we put them in two different line items?
Well, the reason I did is because in the accounting, when we close out the year, we'll record a depreciation expense that's based on our current assets and their remaining useful life. And so that depreciation expense is the line that we use to record that expense. And then this extra amount is an additional amount that we have decided that we want to save. We want to save more than just what the depreciation expense amount shows, because we're talking about replacement of future assets, not just accounting for past costs of assets. Now, with that said, it wouldn't be a problem for us to lump them together. If you'd rather see it that way, it would be fine.
I think the question that, at least as I interpret what Jim's saying, and I have the same question, one of the concerns we've had is that over the decades, there have been some millions of dollars set aside, in air quotes, through depreciation that is not there, that's been spent other places. So every year, there have been departments that have had these depreciation line items, expenses, but the money isn't actually sitting somewhere in an account that we can go dip into at some point when we need it. And I share Jim's concern. Where are we going to put that so that it's set aside and it's seen? And there's, I mean, I understand we've got the expense line item, we've got the retained earnings line item, but at the end of the year, where's that magic bucket that says, okay, here's the X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars that we set aside that we are not touching? That doesn't just kind of morph back into the general fund or anything else like that. Where do we see that?
So the way I've envisioned it is that all of the fund balance in the enterprise funds is for future infrastructure. So we wouldn't ever use fund balance to pay for operations. So as we do the budget each year, we budget current year revenues to pay for current year operations, plus an additional amount that's not being spent, that's being set aside for future infrastructure. And then we decide each year which projects we're going to fund, and it always comes out of fund balance. So it's really when we're constructing the budget each year that we work to make sure that none of our fund balance is being used to fund operations. So when you say where's the money or where is it being stored, all of the fund balance that sits in the sewer fund is being stored for future asset replacement.
Which then leads me to his study that if we're going to put money aside for future asset replacement, then it ought to be in that depreciation that he's selling us on.
We probably, Evan, should just pull those two line items to the end together, because the depreciation number does need to be calculated separately because it's a reportable part of our audit, specifically the depreciation of past assets. So it should be, kept separate from the retained earnings, but it might just be good to organize those two together to see the, total amount of two similar items that, the other thing though, the impact fees are in the fund too. So, and I think that's something that we still need to separate out, that the council wants to be able to see the impact fee part of the fund
Right,
balance
okay.
separate from infrastructure repair and replacement part of the fund balance. So that is a project we need to do, Councilman Swanson.
Part of the question that remains in my mind, though, is that we've had the fund balances, we've had the depreciation lines for years and years and years, yet these depreciated revenues, these expenses that supposedly should have been building have not been. And there's no real visibility. So next year, we, in this particular fund, on that line, we have $195,000 that we're setting aside out of that budget. Next year, that should be that amount plus something else that we're adding, and that amount should grow, kind of like a savings account. If I'm understanding the whole point of saving for future projects. And so where do we see that?
Well, I think the reason it doesn't grow as much as you wish is because we're spending some of it every year on capital projects.
Right, I understand that, but there should still be something somewhere that's growing.
Well, and also, Councilman, to answer that, the city in all past years was not always funding that depreciation line item. Some years, especially I'm thinking when, Councilman Kent Bailey and Councilman Satterthwaite were the ones who really led the effort to fund depreciation at that time, discussion was really started 4 or 5 years ago. We were funding a third or less of the depreciation line. So there wasn't as much building up in the funds that now that the council has gone down this path, there is.
Councilman Satterthwaite, what was the accumulated depreciation that you found as you've been going through this exercise that has been depreciated over the years? It's in the tens of millions of dollars, as I remember
Well,
right.
we've made references to depreciation amounts that he looks at that is part of the financial system. There is a depreciation module that is separate from the accounting we've done, where we've tried to actually list asset by asset. That depreciation fund showed an accumulated depreciation amount of $26 million.
Right.
So, it's we only used that. I mean, I don't know what bearing it had on our determination as to what amount we thought we ought to be setting aside for depreciation in years past. I just know, I remember when Brian Steele was telling us, or we made an agreement amongst us and the council that we would start doing catch-up for the depreciation amounts that apparently had not been set aside during the lean years in 2009, 2010, somewhere in there. It still begs the question, when we say, so here's an amount that we call depreciation and we put it in a fund, there still has to be a mechanism. It's not our intent that just gets saved forever. It does.
Take it out when you need it.
You take it out when you need it, and there needs to be, we need to come up with some rule or some mechanism that triggers when we can use that also accomplishes the objective that we leave it alone when we don't need it. We've said this before. We fear that we get these funds, with a lot of money in them, and some future council who's not aware of everything we've been through comes in and says, "Where did all that money come from?" And we go build an opera house or something.
So I guess we have to account for that. We budget. We have for example, Dave, we would have in the budget for what we think we may need to do in replacing water lines. So if we have a surprise that comes up, then we have to dip into that depreciation fund to be able to pay for that. or the retained earnings fund. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, they're the same.
So, you know, I mean, we've had a lot of water leaks this year. And seems like it.
Actually been pretty
See
good
it.
year.
Well, I see on the mayor's Facebook page almost every week. There's
Probably
because
because we talk about them more to let people know, but yeah. Because of some of the water line projects, replacements we've done, it has reduced the number.
Well, and I think, you know, if you come up with a budget amount that here's what we're gonna do, then the only time we dip into depreciation is if we have a major surprise of some sort, and then we have to dip into depreciation to cover that.
Or every year for
We
the
might.
replacements.
You might do
The
it.
water line replacement, the sewer line replacement, those are what we'd be using the fund for. So every year it'll go up a little and then down because we'll be doing projects every year, most likely. Councilman Swanson?
I just want to be sure that we're not just going through an accounting exercise. And we've got our depreciation line. I want to be sure that we're actually taking care of the future. I mean, we're talking about raising rates and doing all these other things so that we can take care of these future infrastructure needs. I don't want to see that money disappear or
Going to somewhere else.
you know, building up somewhere and some future council comes in and raids the box that should have been to repair that sewer line that just went out, and now we've got millions of dollars of something we need to do, and we could have had the money.
Right. Well, I don't want to paint a perfect picture because I don't think it is. You know, we ought to look at the table again that's in your handout.
With the fund balances,
Which one is it?
This one right here.
No. No. This one right here.
You can look at that.
Thank you. There you go. So, if you look at this table, it shows what we're proposing for utility rate increases. It shows the amount of revenue, total revenue that we're expecting from those increases. And then the column that says fiscal year 18 amount for future needs. Those are the amounts that come out of Lynn's model, you know, that says in fiscal year 18, we should be setting aside $2 million in the water fund for future infrastructure needs. So then I'm saying the next column over, in the current budget, we're setting aside $764,000, so we're short of the estimated need by $1.2 million. In the sewer fund, same kind of thing. The estimate of what we think we actually need for future is $564,000. The amount in the current budget that we've provided is $163,000, and we're short by $401. So you can look through that and see how you feel about those numbers. But the reason we're still short of the need is because we don't want to raise the rates, you know, through the roof all at once. So it's true that we're not where we would like to be at some point, but we're trying to incrementally move in that direction.
And one thing, if I could say, back to the line item detail of the budget, if you look through the utility funds, this is the first time in recent history that retained earnings line item has anything in it,
Right.
which means we're fully funding the depreciation amount, which is one form of savings, quote unquote. And then there's also some retained earnings in those funds that is savings just above and beyond any expenditure that we're having. So that is
So
great news.
I actually need to clarify. I looked at my notes after I spoke, and I think I explained it wrong. So that 69,000 it actually is the impact fee revenues that are coming in this fiscal year that aren't being spent. So I thought it originally was excess revenue, but it's actually impact fee revenues that we can't spend because we don't have
We don't have a
an
project
eligible
to do.
project budgeted.
So we need to label that as impact fees then, so we know that, okay?
Yeah, we should. That would make it clearer. So, and then I looked at my other note here, and this relates to the table that we just talked about. In the sewer fund, we have, what was it? We have $195,000 of depreciation expense budgeted. 31,849,000 of that is unfunded, basically. So we budget an expense to be able to recognize that expense, which is, money that we're wanting to set aside, but $31,000, $32,000 of that is not funded. We essentially we're using retained earnings on the revenue side to make the budget balance. So that's where the shortfall is in the budget, and that aligns with what this chart is explaining as well.
As long as we're tracking our savings some way other than in the checkbook.
So that needs to get easy for us to find and see. And the same thing with impact fees. It needs to be, we need to find a way so that it's easy for us to pick that out and know the difference between what we're actually expending, anticipating expending next year for those kind of projects, but also how much is still set aside is King's X with whatever rules we have for allowing it to be spent.
And at the last meeting, we did talk about pulling out impact fees into their own funds. And we weren't able to make that happen yet, but we're planning to pull those out for the final budget. At least the impact fees that have current balances. A couple of the impact fees are in negative balances. We already talked about why we think that's a positive thing.
Whether we're going to leave it alone, and because we're always we always owe it back. We've overpaid, right?
Right.
That's the whole.
We've paid ahead.
It's called deficit spending. And the government's really good at that.
Makes the world go around.
Yeah, Made Venezuela go around, making Brazil go around right now, and right down the tubes as they go down the drain.
Do you want me to review the unfunded depreciation amounts in each fund? Would that be a somber way to finish this meeting?
It sort of shows up here, right?
Yeah.
It does.
On that table, so I think.
And you're talking there, though, from the model, not depreciation under the auditor's definition, right?
It's not that's underfunded how much we would like to have in the model, but it's not underfunded what you're showing on the model.
So this table is based on the model. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, in this budget, we are underfunding the depreciation expense that we have to report in here as a depreciation expense. So let me look at the water fund. The water fund is the exception. The water fund, we are more than fully funding the auditor's depreciation expense.
That 5140,550. Page 16.
So depreciation expense in the water fund is $660,000. Oh, right. I'm sorry. Right.
5140,550.
So that depreciation expense is fully funded. Plus, we're setting aside more than that in the water fund.
Yeah, another 602 in retained earnings.
Yeah, but for about 500,000 of the 602 is impact fees. So,
Kind of like, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at this wrong, but I'd like to see, like that 30, I'd like to see that retained earnings, that's impact fee, so we cannot take that and put it into depreciation, because I'd like to see, that if we're listing 150,000 depreciation or 195,000, then I'd like to see us take 31,000 out of that impact fees and show that, or that retained earnings, and show that we're fully funded on that, and show less in retained earnings.
in the water fund?
No, I'm talking about in the sewer fund, I think it is. You said we were 31,000 underfunded on that? Okay, so can we take money out of that 31,000 out of retained earnings, and put it in, so we're fully funded, and then that shows less in retained earnings? Or is that impact fees that we can't do that with?
That's impact fees, the
So
69,000.
we can't take 31,000 out of that and put it in there? Okay.
No.
We ought to show,
Yeah, we
some
need to
way,
show it.
we ought to show at the side of the 195 or something that we're, in parentheses, how much we're underfunded in that. So we don't think we're fully funded in that 150,000.
I could do that.
Do that?
Yeah, I can do that. So in the water fund, I mentioned that 500,000 of the retained earnings is impact fee money. The water fund, or the water impact fee, is one of the impact fees that has a huge negative balance. So that $500,000 is impact fee revenue that is basically paying down that balance. So when it comes into the fund, it becomes water fund balance that is not subject to the restrictions of impact fee money. We basically already paid the impact fee money, or we've spent it on a project, and then this is reimbursing the fund balance for what was spent. So,
Well, and if that's, I understand that's the case, and we've kind of made the decision that for impact fees, we considered just taking everything to a zero balance and starting over, or to whatever calculations had been made, we were way in arrears. That means that impact fees, we may never, I mean, it may be years and years before we spend impact fees on real impact fee projects. That's possible, right?
Because we've already spent
Because
it.
we've already
Yeah,
spent it. We're
yeah,
so
because you've
far-
already spent it, yeah.
So far in the hole on it.
that doesn't necessarily mean you can't spend this money on impact fee projects.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is or that's where I'm headed, is that I think we should be spending it on impact fee
So
projects.
you're saying we should forgive the other debt?
This will all kind of shuffle out when we redo the impact fees, because with all the depreciation work that Public Works has done, that helps us give our baseline costs, and we'll look at our past costs with our past incomes and our past projects over the past 10 years, and we'll be able to kind of put a number to all of this and make a little more sense of it than what we're getting out of the funds, because those original negative balances were set up by people who aren't in the city anymore, and so we're going to have to investigate it a
Which
little
begs a question that Lynn was talking about, I think, is do we forgive that? I mean, it's the one arm of the city owes the other arm of the city. At what point do you say, hey, we're forgiving that debt and just starting from ground zero now?
In my opinion, I don't think you ever forgive that. The idea is that the general fund or the utility funds, the enterprise funds that paid for those projects, should be reimbursed. The question is, we're just going to fine tune exactly how much the negative is, and make sure that we tie it all up.
It doesn't stop us from using current impact fees for current projects and just suspending repayment of those debts to a later date, because there will be at some future point in 10, 20 years, let's say, when a lot of these neighborhoods are filled, we've done most of the projects for the city growth, but there's still 20% of the lots in the city to be sold. when we collect those impact fees, we won't have as many projects, and it will be an ideal time to pay back those previous impact fees rather than just saying to those new residents, well, you got lucky, you came in at the end, you don't have to pay an impact fee. Instead,
No, I'm not
we'll
saying-
have that debt to pay back. So in our opinion, it doesn't make sense to ever waive it, because there'll be a time when there'll be impact fees, but probably not projects, and it can pay it back.
I'm not talking about waiving impact fees. I'm talking about this arm of the city owns this hand of the city owns this hand of the city. And we can carry that forward in perpetuity. And if a credit rating agency was giving us a credit rating based on how well we paid back that bill that we have, we wouldn't have a very good credit rating, because we're not keeping up with the deal that we proposed to do. Bankers years ago used to do that. They'd make a commercial loan to a business entity, and they'd say, okay, now all you have to pay is the interest on it. We're going to loan you $100,000, and you can just keep rolling that note over as many times as you want. All you have to do is pay the interest. And all of a sudden, you had these business institutions that had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of notes, and all they ever did is pay the interest. They never paid the principal, and they went bankrupt.
So our system actually works a little differently in that we've got let's say that we've got a $3 million negative, and then the next year we do $600,000 worth of projects. Well, that means that we now have a $3.6 million negative. When the impact fees come in, it's a first in, first out. We're actually paying off the old amount, but now there's a new project that is increasing the negative. And so that's why this negative balance has lasted so long, is that we've been doing projects. So in reality, we are paying off the old projects. It's just the new projects create a new negative balance that needs to be taken care of moving forward. Does that make, it's kind of it's an ever evolving fund. It's
like
just
that.
a really,
And
what I
it
told you,
means we
deficit
don't,
spending.
we're always safe on impact fee accounting, because we're
Right.
so far in arrears.
Because there
Nobody's
could
gonna
be
be
some
able to-
future time to use the one hand to the other, that there'd be no projects to pay for the impact fees of, especially, let's say, the last developments in the city, if there was no balance to pay back. Because those last few developments scattered around aren't going to require a new well, a new water line. Most of that will have been done and created the negative balance for them to still pay up until the last home is built in this city. So it seems counterintuitive to most of our views on things, but it is the best thing long run for the city to have that balance owed, because then there's always a use for those impact fees.
We get Pleasant View to co-sign with us on that or something.
Is it possible that somebody could argue that they don't have to pay impact fees because we're so far overpaid?
no, the most they'd argue is that they owe less money because the infrastructure was cheaper, but it's impact fee cases are quite complicated, and there's not a lot of people who sue cities over them. And you won't ever get sued by the law firm that sues the most people, because I work for you. So
That'd be worth something.
John, have another ice cream.
but I mean, that's why it's good that we're redoing our impact fees. Is there are dramatic changes happening in the impact fee realm again. Just we went through some about 6 years ago, and there's another round coming through. There was recently there's been a lawsuit that's been settled down in Utah County for several millions of dollars over impact fees, and so there's more changes on the horizon, I think.
Well, and I don't know I don't remember that amount, but it's somewhere down in Utah Valley where there was a challenge to impact fees to a city, and the challenger won.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And so there's been another case since then. So there's things happening that are changing the playing field again.
Because those were arbitrary figures that were sent out instead of based on a study, which we're required to do.
Yeah, the city council made a kind of arbitrary decision after the study.
Yep.
increase them.
You know what's interesting to me? I mean, we're having this discussion, we're looking at some things. Here are some changes, okay? And by law, we have to pass this tonight.
Tentative budget has to
So-
be passed. tonight.
So we got 3 hours to come up and pass this. If we don't, we're in violation of the law. So,
Have
you know,
another ice cream.
Are you suggesting we go for
No.
2 hours and 58
no,
minutes?
what I'm suggesting is that, you know, at the end of the night, the explanation of all these things doesn't mean anything because we gotta pass the budget or we're in violation of the law.
But we could change it.
We can
Well, we
change it
could
tonight.
We could change some, yeah.
I mean, we've been through a lot of hours, tons of hours on this already, which most people in our audience won't appreciate.
Yes. Well, I do. I appreciate it, and Cheryl appreciates it more than I do.
I don't think that's appreciation.
Anything else on utility funds? I just want to make sure. Is there anything else about utility funds? Okay, are you gonna, I don't know, do you have something else before we talk? I just wanted to remind you about the health, high deductible plan discussion, and so I don't know if you have something else, but if not, let's talk about that.
Yeah, we haven't heard about that.
Yeah, we can do that.
Some of this stuff's new.
It's not new.
I think
Yes,
the
it is
main,
new.
Annette just requested that we let you know what our current contributions are to health savings accounts when employees elect to be on a high deductible health plan. Let me pull that up. There's not a change proposed here. This is the same as what has been in place.
So, Council, if you remember when we passed this, maybe it was almost a year ago, for those employees who were on the high deductible plan, it cost us a whole lot less money. And so the council said, well, we're going to contribute that into their health savings account. For a single person, it was $500. For an employee and a spouse, or an employee and children, it was $750, and then for a family, it was $1,000. And so, but in that passing, we said we're going to bring this to you every year and make sure that you're still okay with those numbers. And so that's, you know, the discussion right now. Staff is recommending we just stay with the same amounts we were at last year.
Can you remind us or tell us how much has been used? We didn't have a lot of people on high deductible.
We gained 2 more last year. So I believe we have 7.
Maybe because of the policy to increase the, yeah, that's good.
You know, John, I really don't like it when you say, you remember we did this last year. You know, when you're my age, you don't even remember what you had for breakfast in the morning. Last year.
So that is the same program that is in this tentative budget, are those numbers John just read?
I think
Just
we
want
had
to
a-
make sure there's,
I think
if
we
you
did
wanted to
have
make a
long
change, you could.
discussion about that last year, so.
So it's not a change, it's the same amount, but we wanted to just make sure we discussed it with you again. Okay, Evan, what else do you have?
One other change, we had moved $12,000 in vehicle maintenance expense out of police motor pool and put it in the regular motor pool. And then we talked about it and moved it back. So that shows up in there, just $12,000.
Why?
Well, we made a mistake in not consulting the chief is really what we did.
That is a mistake.
He doesn't have to even have a concealed carry permit to get you to change your mind.
So you had a gun to your head and you just,
I just had Ciro, his partner.
So we fixed it. So that's all I really had to talk about. If you have other questions, we're happy to respond to other questions.
We have one online question from a citizen. Dave, can you come up to answer this one? It was a question about, for Public Works, why do we feel it is necessary, advisable to provide uniforms? So I think that is a fair question. So can you give us a little input on why we do that? What's the rationale, etc.
Mostly to just look, well, professional is one thing, and then just to identify ourselves if we're at somebody's house. I mean, we go see citizens, every single day, so we're out in the community. So more than anything, just to identify identify ourselves with our uniforms, and then just to look professional.
And then I would add the cleaning is usually because of the kind of work that's being done. Like this big water leak we had on 2600, I was out there with the crew till about 4 a.m. And obviously it's extremely messy work down in a 8-foot trench and dirt and water and everything. So we do provide the cleaning. I know that's not the case everywhere. My personal experience, I've seen it both ways. In the Army, our uniforms are provided by the government. Other than for officers, we have to buy our own, but the soldiers get their own uniforms. In private sector companies, I know sometimes they are charged. So we've seen it both ways, but that's why we as a city have done it this way. So I think that answers that question. We got that question online. Thank you, Dave. Councilman Swanson?
I know that in our company, we purchase our own uniforms, but that's because they're not mandatory. If we want to wear a shirt that has our company logo on it, we can. If we don't want to, we don't have to. Where I believe we have a policy that when you're coming to work, it's mandated, and I think that's also part of why we provide them.
Okay, and one other online comment we got was about snow plowing. And this was just a recommendation from one of our citizens that they like the idea of rolling over the snowplow money, but if it accumulates to a larger amount, to stop the rollover. So
Probably put a cap on it.
So that's just a comment as well online. We'll be having comments in 1 minute, Randy.
So talking about the uniforms just brings another thing to my mind. So these are taxable because it's a shirt that they could wear for everyday use. So if we had like a company like Cintas that provides uniforms and cleans those uniforms, would that still be taxable?
I'm not sure.
So
My understanding was yes, because you still take it home.
Oh.
So my understanding with that was that it still could be taxable because you could take it home, because they only do laundry 1 day a week, so that you're still taking those clothes home with you, so you could still wear it out.
It's still suitable for everyday wear.
Everyday use, yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah, because that was another question that we had addressed too. Even buying the shirts, giving them to Cintas, and letting them, give it to, or launder them, and give it to us every day. But it still fell under that same, at least in my understanding, it fell under that same thing, because they only launder it 1 time a week.
What if they had 5 or 6 shirts and they were left at the Public Works building? Wear your own shirt to work, change into your uniform, and then...
We talked about that too, but I mean, that was just kind of...
Okay.
Yeah.
Thought.
So I still have this softball jersey top. I don't know what's going to happen here. Whether I'm going to get charged for that.
You're going to be taxed for it.
I'm not going to wear it here. Or Evan will see it. And
he'll tax you.
The tax man coming.
I don't know that we're going to try to be retroactive about this.
Okay, other discussion items on the tentative budget?
Have a resolution number?
Wait.
07-2017.
I just had a comment, Mayor. I haven't had time to review it because I don't know when you sent us the email on the salary things. I was just reviewing it on Phil's. Yeah, I see. I'm forgetting names already. So reviewing it on Phil's tablet here, and I see these market adjustments, and I don't know. did we talk about those in April, and where did the market adjustments come from? How do we know how they were figured? I didn't, when did your email go out? I go to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock, so I can get up at 4:30, so if it comes out after that, I don't read it.
I think it wasn't yesterday or last night. I think
I looked at the city thing yesterday. I didn't see
I'm
anything.
looking at it here. I got it
Okay.
on
Last night before I
5/1.
went
I think it was maybe earlier today.
no.
Mine's dated 10:12 p.m. yesterday, May
Yeah,
1st.
so I was in bed when that came out, so.
Okay. Well, where it came from was salary surveys that we did, which I can show you the full documents on that, or we can have that
Well,
as a
and
discussion item
I
as
would
well.
just say that, we're gonna pass the budget tonight, the tentative budget, and we may, I'd like to review those before we pass the final budget, and it would have been nice. We should have thought far enough ahead that we were looking at those things in our April thing to see those kind of things. That's, we want to get better, and I think we have been getting better every year at these workshops, but I think that when we're talking about anything, that we're gonna have, we shouldn't have last minute changes when we're gonna vote on it at 10:30 at night, the night before we're gonna vote on it. We're forced to vote on it because of the law.
And this was that, I hate to say if you remember, but there was that $8,000 that was in administration salaries.
Yeah.
That the mayor said he would come back to you with more specificity. That's where that money went to. So it hasn't necessarily increased the budgeted amount from what you saw last time. It's just been distributed to the appropriate funds now and taken off of the administrative fund.
Okay, going forward, now I won't be on the council next year when we go through the budget, but going forward, I would request for whoever's on the council that be in detail stuff when people take a day off work to come to the budget workshop.
Yeah, fair enough. And we'd wanted to do that and should have, and I guess I thought it was longer ago than that, but a lot has happened in the last 24 hours. So there you go. I was sending emails too till about 1 a.m. last night. So yes, fair point, well taken.
And Jim, you can be on the council next year. You can be.
It's okay.
No, I can't.
Okay.
It's
There's-
okay. You can.
Nope, there's a mandatory retirement age at 70.
Any other questions or comments on the tentative budget?
I think we've set it out. I'll just reiterate that the impact fee, visibility, and then, of course, how we deal with the depreciation. I think we're still up for looking for good ideas as to how we make it visible and it's obvious to the council as to what's there and what the rules are. So we're not done yet on that, but I'm appreciative of the effort made by the council to put a dent in this problem. So are we ready for a?
I'll make a motion. Mayor, I'd move that we approve Resolution 07-2017, accepting the tentative budget for fiscal year 2017-18.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the tentative budget. Is there any further discussion? Start the voting. Councilman Satterthwaite,
It's a yes.
Councilman Uri,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Turner,
Yes.
and Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then the tentative budget is approved. What that means is we've complied with state law, but the council could change anything they wish between now and the final budget, which will be, as Evan said, in early May, or excuse me, June.
June 13th.
June 13th.
And we should note in the minutes that there will be a public hearing that
That
night
night.
as well.
Can I
So
ask-
any input anyone has or anyone listening online, the council can still take over the next month to make any changes the council sees fit. Councilman Uri.
Yes, can I ask that if we're gonna have any changes that come from the administration, that we have those at least 2 weeks in advance?
Evan, John, it's you two that'll be carrying that out. So can you do that?
That sounds fair.
I think for our part,
Okay.
I don't see many changes happening, so I feel comfortable if you two say yes.
I did get an email from Evan about 12:03
AM
in the morning, yeah, before we did one of our first retreats.
I set my alarm clock and woke up to send it.
So, Councilman Uri, yes, we will have that.
Thank-
And we'll get the more details you asked for on the salaries too.
Thanks.
Anything else, council, you'd like us to work on for the next meetings related to the budget? Okay, thank you. Then that brings us back to public comments. If anyone would like to share anything with the council, we'd love to hear from you.
Randy Wynn again. Same address.
See,
I had
Randy's my age, he's probably forgotten his address.
Yeah, right. Well, look it up. Thank you, Jim. One semi-light comment concerning shirts. If we put $20 in every time they buy a new shirt, does that incentivize the using more shirts than you'd normally? Because they probably won't owe that many taxes. Anyway, more serious or heavy comment. In my experience in business, and I asked this as a question, I asked it to you, the funds that you're worrying about seeing, normally that shows up on a balance sheet and not in a budget. In other words, these are for 1 year's, this is 1 year's budget. So these accumulated funds, does the city have a balance sheet listing all of our assets? And
have
that
several.
should be one of them. Isn't that right? And that would show you so that it would accumulate each year. That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn. Okay, anyone else? No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. All right, let's do our council, mayor, staff comments. Dave and Tiffany and Chief, thank you, and Evan, our department heads, for being here. Anyone got any comments you'd like to make?
Thanks for being here. That's my comment.
Okay, Annette? John?
Nope.
Okay, let's start for our council at that end this time. Councilman Turner.
Just a note that last week I wasn't here and you were out by 7:30.
Now we're
Just comment. Just went to the high school play. If you haven't had a chance to see it, you got to get tickets and go. I just forgot of it. The one about the Little Mermaid. Thank you. I'm like some girl singing. But anyway, it's a great play. It is. It's a great play, and the high school does an amazing job. So if you get a chance, support them kids. So that's it for right now. I got my mosquito board next week. If you want to know any buzz about that, let me know.
Councilman Swanson?
Just again, thank you to the department heads for being here, for accommodating our ever-increasing requests for detail and information, just so that we can be sure we're managing our citizens' money well. We appreciate your patience with us as we dig for that detail. And that's all I have.
Councilman Uri?
One of the things that I thought about tonight when we're talking about that pond, okay, the committee pond, it would seem to me that as we go into negotiations with Pineview Water on that, we ought to have some kind of a maintenance contract with them. Who's going to take care of leaks and how will they be addressed? That shouldn't, if that's their reservoir, that shouldn't fall totally to the city to have to take care of those leaks and those kind of things. So,
Okay.
if we could work on that. Another thing that I became concerned about, and Tiffany, maybe you can help me with this. talked to Nigel yesterday on a matter about copyrights of, how he gets the copyrights to show movies and that. And he said he doesn't show the movies in the park because too many problems with kids causing problems up there. But I would think if we're going to spend money on that amphitheater, it shouldn't be used for just a play once a year. We ought to look at what can we do to mitigate, what are those problems, and what can we do to mitigate those problems.
You're going to get an answer.
I have an answer for you.
Sure.
And it's something we've talked with the police chief and with the staff about. So what we're going to do for this year, we have budgeted for this coming year to do movies in the park. As in the past, it's like every Friday in June or every Saturday in July, and we've mixed that up quite a bit, alternating with the movies that we have at the Aquatic Center. So we may have a Monday, and then a week and a half later, we have a Friday or a Saturday. And so it's mixed up. There is not a consistent schedule, which may be a little bit more difficult for people to follow, and we'll see how that works, but it will also be more difficult to create a hangout spot to cause problems as well. So I talked with the police chief and with the other staff, and we're going to try that out and see how it works, because we feel like movies in the park can be a really beneficial thing for our community.
I do too, and so I think we just need to address what those problems are instead of just say, well, we're not going to do them anymore.
No, we'll have them this year, and we have 5 nights picked out for movies at Barker Park and 2 nights picked out for movies at the Aquatic Center. So if you have any recommendations for movies you'd like to see, let me know.
Okay.
Thank you, Tiffany.
You may think this is going to go away, but it's not going to go away until I find out what we're doing on it. Smaller garbage cans.
Brian working on it, so it looks like we're gonna order, at least start with 20 and see where that goes, where we go.
Okay. And so people then that would request one of those, they can switch their big one for the small one if they're not, okay. Then a couple other things, Dave, and you may have seen these things. I've seen a couple of things on Facebook. Maybe it's false news, I don't know. But some things that interested me, and I saved them. I shared them, and I'd be glad to send the thing to you. There was one in Europe. They're starting to use now recycled plastics to mix in with the asphalt when they redo roads, and they've done some tests on it and think the roads will last longer. Do you know of anything that's happening that way here?
Not as far as recycled plastics, though. I mean, the stuff that we have talked about.
Dave, can you just come to the mic, please?
Yeah, as far as recycled plastics, I haven't heard anything. I mean, we can look into that. I mean, there are some metals that, and some rock mixtures that they're doing, but
They do have some rubber mixtures too.
in rubber mixtures, yeah. But as far as plastics, I haven't heard. But yeah, I'd absolutely like to see anything like that.
I saw another one. I'll be glad to send it to you. I saw one this morning, and I think it was someplace in South America that they've got a product now that when they have to repair cracks in the cement, they mix this product together, spread it out over there, takes the cracks right out of the cement.
Okay. No, yeah, I mean, we're always looking into new things, so absolutely.
Okay, anything else? Councilman Satterthwaite?
Nothing here.
Councilwoman Stoker?
I've been quiet all night. I'm not going to start now.
Okay, I just got a couple quick things. I want to echo some of what's been said about the budget. This has been one meeting of many we've held, including 2 literally all day long meetings on the budget. I was tabulating between the council department heads. We've spent well over 500 hours putting together this budget. So thank you. I think we have easily one of the most involved city councils in the budget process, and I think that's a good thing to have more input from all the elected officials in the budget process. So that's good. Quick update on streetlights. Our streetlight project is advancing well. You see the cones and things out there in Washington. The bases are almost all poured, and the lights may start to be installed possibly as soon as next week or within a week or 2.
start getting those street lights in, and should be done, we think, Dave, by the end of May. All the new street lights on Washington Boulevard. Additionally, our new LED street lights to replace our existing light poles on Washington have arrived. We have all our street lights except Washington have transitioned to LED. We have 9 street lights on Washington that are our last non-LED lights. We're going to switch those out. Tentatively, Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. is our kind of celebration time. We're inviting the media. We'll be one of the first cities in Utah to be 100% LED on our street lights. So we're going to make that a big deal and like to invite any of the council members that can come. That time may change because Rocky Mountain Power is joining us, an executive from Rocky Mountain Power, since they, through the rebates, helped us make this possible. So next Wednesday. Next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow at 10 a.m. So I'll send you an email for sure once we confirm it, but maybe kind of tentatively put that on your calendar if you can. Come celebrate that with us, which I think is a great thing, that our city will be one of the first in the whole state to be 100% LED. Then lastly, our meeting next week, we are proposing canceling that meeting. We don't have enough items, and I know I'm out of town, 1 or 2 of the council's out of town. It's going to be a skeleton crew. The agreement with Mr. Rands is set to come the next week anyways, so what's your feeling on that, council, canceling the meeting for next week?
Move for council.
You had a second, third, fourth, and fifth
Okay.
on that, I think.
We have a motion and a second to cancel the meeting for next week. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Then the meeting's canceled next week. We'll see everyone in 2 weeks. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
She's way
All in
over.
favor, please say aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And please grab some more ice cream. Take some home to the kids, grandkids.
I'll leave all this budget